Okay, we left off at slide number 45B. So this is set B of the slides, and we were talking about the resting membrane potential, and that has to do with the fact that it's at rest. In other words, when the cell is not conducting an impulse or contracting, like a muscle cell is not contracting. So at rest, there is a net positive charge on the outside of the plasma membrane and a net negative charge on the inside. That means there is a voltage across the membrane, or a membrane potential, and it is normally around -70. We talked about how potassium is the key player in this resting membrane potential and establishing it. So let's look at this. Let's start with slide number 45 and review, because I think that we covered slide 44. There we go. All right, so if we look at the picture first, we can see that the concentration of potassium ions is higher inside the cell and lower outside. We can also see the concentration of sodium is higher outside and lower inside. And then we can see chloride ions, but they're not really a key player, so we won't talk about them anymore. We can also see these large proteins that are negatively charged. So in step one, it says potassium ions diffuse down their steep concentration gradient out of the cell via leakage channels. The loss of potassium results in a negative charge on the inner plasma membrane face. And that is because you have the negative proteins already. So they are already contributing to the negative charge. Then you have the loss of potassium ions because they are leaking through or diffusing through passively through these leak channels that allow them to move from their high to low concentration. So you're losing positive charge, and you've already got a lot of negative charge from the proteins. All right, next step, potassium ions also move into the cell because they're attracted to the negative charge established on the inner plasma membrane face. So there is a force that is pulling them out, and then there's a force that wants to pull them back in because they're being attracted back to that negative charge. In step 3, a negative membrane potential is established when that drive for them to move out and the drive for the potassium to move in is reached equilibrium. And that potential is -90 millivolts. Although that's not the end of the story, sodium ions also have a role in this, and the role of the sodium ions causes the resting membrane potential to go up to about -70. So what maintains this potential? What maintains it? What keeps it from going up or down from the -70 millivolts? Okay, and it's maintained through the sodium-potassium pump. The sodium-potassium pump, there we go. Trying to get my pointer again. And we probably have to go through all those steps. Let's see. One more time. All right, so the resting membrane potential is maintained because of the sodium-potassium pump. So the sodium-potassium pump, if you remember, is continuously moving 3 sodium ions out and 2 potassium ions in. And you need to know that. You're going to need to know that for the muscle chapter and the nerve chapter, so you might as well learn that. 3 sodium out and 2 potassium in. So that compensates for the sodium that is leaking into the cell and the potassium that's leaking out of the cell. So it says a steady state is maintained because the rate of active pumping of sodium equals the rate of sodium diffusion or leaking into the cell. And then when neurons send electrical impulses and muscle cells contract, this is an electrical event in both cases, and it upsets the resting membrane potential by intentionally opening gated sodium and potassium channels. So sodium is allowed to rush into the cell and potassium is allowed to rush out of the cell when the cell is activated, is active, is conducting an impulse or contracting. So, but other than that, the resting membrane potential is maintained at negative 70 millivolts by the sodium-potassium pump. So last section, cells interact with their environment by responding directly to other cells or indirectly to extracellular chemicals. And the interactions always involve the glycocalyx. So what we're going to talk about are cell adhesion molecules, or CAMs, and plasma membrane receptors. The role of cell adhesion molecules, or CAMs. Every cell has thousands of sticky glycoprotein, and that means it's a protein in the membrane with a carbohydrate chain attached. We talked about that. It's part of the glycocalyx. So one of those membrane proteins has a carbohydrate chain attached, and it is a cell adhesion molecule that projects from the membrane. Okay. Functions of CAMs are to anchor the cell to the extracellular matrix or anchor the cell to other cells, to assist in the movement of cells past one another, to attract white blood cells to injured or infected areas, to stimulate synthesis or degradation of adhesive membrane junctions, like tight junctions, stimulate their synthesis or their breakdown, and to transmit intracellular signals to direct cell migration, proliferation, and specialization. So lots and lots of functions of CAMs in cell communication. As far as plasma membrane receptor proteins, they serve as binding sites for chemical signals or ligands. Contact signaling is when cells that touch recognize each other by each cell's unique surface membrane receptors. That's used in development and also in immunity. So that's when cells come in contact with each other and they recognize those carbohydrate chains that extend out from the plasma membrane. We actually talked about that earlier, but I don't remember where the slide is for that. But we looked at a slide that showed, back when we talked about membrane proteins, it was probably in the set A. But anyway, chemical signaling is interaction between receptors and ligands. And ligands are chemical messengers. And those can be hormones or they can be neurotransmitters. They can also be chemicals called paracrines. But neurotransmitters and hormones is what we will most likely encounter in this class. And the binding will trigger some type of action, either activating an enzyme or opening gated channels. So, all right, the last thing is we are going to talk about a special type of receptor called the G protein linked receptors, or sometimes I see it worded the protein coupled receptors. And this is how they work. Oops. Okay. And I know it's hard to read that. So what you see down here is a ligand, which could be like the hormone insulin. Insulin works this way. Okay. So let's say the ligand binds to the receptor. So insulin binds to the receptor protein, which is coupled with a G protein. Okay. So let's look at step 1 and see how this works. The ligand, which we call the first messenger, binds to the receptor changes shape and activates. Okay? So this receptor activates. Then the activated receptor binds to a G protein and activates it. Okay, so the G protein is activated. And a lot of times what that means is that it changes shape. All right, that causes it to release GDP. And we know about ADP, adenosine diphosphate. GDP and GTP are like ATP. Okay, GDP would have 2 phosphate groups attached to it. So it releases GTP and binds GDP and binds GTP. So bottom line is binding GTP, this one that looks like a sun, it just represents energy. GTP and ATP would cause similar responses. That is, it's a source of energy. Okay, So the GTP binds to the G protein, which has been activated. It says step 3, the activated G protein activates or interactivates. It depends on the situation, but an effector protein by causing its shape to change. So here's the effector protein. So we've got a receptor and an effector. That's sounds a lot like negative feedback, doesn't it? But it's really a first and second messenger situation. So anyway, the G protein activates the effector protein. Let's see what happens next. The activated effector enzymes catalyze reactions that produce second messengers in the cell. So we've got these second messengers like cyclic AMP and calcium. So that second messenger could be cyclic AMP or it can be calcium. AMP is adenosine monophosphate. And then we have the second messengers activate other enzymes or ion channels. Cyclic AMP typically activates a kinase enzyme. And then that causes several reactions. In the case of insulin, the overall view, if insulin was the ligand, is all of these steps, the first and second messenger and activating the kinase, lead to the lowering of blood sugar. So it's going to be a bunch of reactions that lead to some type of response by the cell. The cell in this case is going to be like a liver cell, and the liver cell will take in glucose and use it to be stored as glycogen. So it will convert that glucose into chains of glucose called glycogen, and that will help to lower blood glucose levels. So that's the overall effect here. And that's it for the set B.